Well, first of all, it's always a pleasure getting to present at the High Plains Conference, albeit virtually, but hey, it's the cards we were dealt this year, and both Matt Wilson and John set me up nice here because there's a lot of tie-in from what they were discussing with this presentation and specifically this event. Now, obviously, fairly quiet tornado season for most of the Central Plains. We didn't have hardly anything over southwest Kansas, but as usual, late May did provide at least a couple of events to review, more over southern Nebraska into northern Kansas, but specifically this Benkelman tornadic supercell over Goodland CWA. So don't worry, Jeremy, I'm not going to pick on your office or anything. It just happens to be the event I wanted to present on. But I will openly admit, the last few minutes before tornadogenesis, I didn't interpret what was ongoing correctly. Prior to that, I seemed to have figured it out pretty well, but I just didn't know what was going on. And so that's why I'm here to basically detail some of the key findings from this case, obviously in hopes to improve warning decision making. So just as a quick review of what happened on this day, for those that are not familiar, the Benkelman storm was really just part of a fairly typical kind of late May, I don't know if you call it a mini outbreak of tornadic supercells along a kind of retreating warm front extending from really the Nebraska Panhandle into central Kansas. So really by itself, nothing really out of the norm with this storm, or for that matter, the overall event. Is this stuff happens in late May, early June across this part of the country. And so in terms of the Benkelman event, it's really several tornadoes, but there was a string of tornado reports starting just a few miles north of the town beginning at 325, which Goodland categorized here as Tornado 1. And the storm obviously continued moving roughly north-northeast along Highway 61, where it dropped another tornado, and actually I believe a satellite vortex based off some pictures. Lasted for 8 miles before dissipating with tons of chaser pics, which I've taken the liberty of using several today. So since it's fairly obvious from the title that I'm going to delve into ZDRs and buoyancy related issues, Matt and John talked about some of this stuff, but I thought it might be good to quickly review why we look at this stuff via some of the TWIP modules that many of you are familiar with. So one of the key reasonings for assessing the existence of an arc along the forward flank reflectivity gradient region is kind of seen from this Kumjian and Rizkov conceptual model, is that it helps anticipate low-level mesocyclone intensity trends. Now, specifically, the arc is really a manifestation of hydrometeor size sorting caused by the mean low-level storm relative wind. So it subsequently gives us kind of a mechanism to qualitatively assess the amount of streamwise vorticity feeding into the low-level meso. And so that's important because it provides a prognostic capability with low-level meso strength rather than diagnostic rotation evaluation. You've all probably getting tired of hearing me say that, but it is important if we're going to improve our decision making. So I will add that the simple existence of an arc in higher low-level SRH environments, say like 0 to 1 over 200, is typically sufficient evidence that the storm scale is nudging the background SRH to intensify or maintain a meso. And that works pretty well with an exception, and that occurs more into these weaker to moderate level SRH environments where the storm has to do more than just nudge the background. It typically, through storm scale process, has to provide most of the necessary streamwise vorticity. And so that's kind of like Matthew talked about. That's where we can account for this with what's called the KDP foot ZDR Arc Separation Vector in comparison to storm motion. And we do this in order, again, to determine the angle between the two vectors. In larger values, generally qualitatively infer higher storm scale SRH. So great technique. And just a brief toss in here, and this actually is some algorithm output from Matthew's program, The Sport. But there is active research by not only him, but Penn State that's beginning to try to automate this calculation to some degree. As you can see with not only the outlines here of the ZDR Arc in blue and the KDP foot in green, but also calculation of the separation vector angle. Now, I add this kind of half jokingly, but to be blunt, this type of information being fed into machine learning is really going to be solid and at times difficult to beat, especially if a forecaster is still using legacy rotational values to anticipate tornadogenesis. However, as I'll detail with this case, there are still some limitations with automation of ZDR Arc detection that could infer or incorrectly assign, at least in your mind, a low genesis probability. when in reality it's fairly high. And so fear not, we can still defeat the machines. So in particular, this connects back to a TWIP module. And this is kind of connected over to what John talked about a little bit ago with how using dual pole we can infer the degree of storm scale negative buoyancy that may inhibit tornadogenesis. And so this is based, not on my own thoughts, obviously, but decades of research showing how we can infer hydrometeor character from dual pole products and associated buoyancy profiles. So the idea here is that something such as a region of, say, reduced CC or around 0 ZDR can tell us not only about the hydrometeor character, but also buoyancy and specifically how it kind of has a reverberating effect on things that ultimately inhibit tornadogenesis, seen in the various bullet points here. There's many things it can impact, so it's not like it's just one, but the main theme here is that this can inhibit genesis. And so this takes us back to the ZDR arcs and what you can infer when the arc is maybe disrupted or completely disappear. And kind of as I was asking Matthew, it seems to be connected to hail. And so as illustrated in the conceptual model, the arc shown in the red shaded area becomes disrupted due to this region of low ZDR, kind of the blue area. And the key takeaway is that this suggests that a region with a strong rain hail mix or wet melting hail is introducing very negatively buoyant parcels into that near surface airstream that feeds the region under the low-level meso. And so again, not to duplicate what John had, but just a good tie-in as it connects back to this left flank velocity enhancement. By the way, got to come up with a good shorter name since we had survey. I don't know if the leaf V or the left V, I don't know. Got to come up with something. But anyway, this all ties back to this airstream and tornado events. We need to see this kind of cyclonic turning near the low-level meso for anticipating genesis. We do that through that convergence. However, in these ZDR disruption cases, if we're assuming there's a lot of rain mixed with hail or wet melting hail, in theory, we'd see more of the conceptual model on the left, since there is an infusion of more negatively buoyant air into the left flank velocity enhancement that ultimately causes the airstream to surge beyond the low-level meso, with, in this case, tornadogenesis failing. So here's just a quick example from our training. Hopefully many of you have seen this already, but what it might look like when we have this kind of null or this non-tornadic scenario where we have both a disrupted arc and an associated band of kind of negative or near 0 ZDR along with reduced CC cutting across that rear flank, forward flank interface. Now, the left flank velocity enhancement airstream, you can see, starts off kind of as a minimum, as John talked about, that's emanating from deeper into the storm core, kind of seeing the upper right panel. But then that becomes a kind of an inbound, which now you're seeing it surge well past the location of strongest lift near the low-level meso. It's shown kind of at the stronger inbound values that are extending even beyond the hook. So just basic review, didn't want to spend too long on that. But we'll go back to the Benkelman storm, which we already know is a prolific tornado producer. I love this picture, by the way. Yet it had a ZDR disruption. What's going on? What did I miss? So we're going to kind of step through the data leading up to genesis. So in this case, we're going to start off with this time period at about 13 minutes before tornado onset. And this display and most of the other ones, I'm going to show you half-degree reflectivity in the upper left, ZDR, again, half-degree ZDR in the lower left, half-degree KDP in the lower right, and then finally half-degree CC in the upper right, which I will toggle back and forth between, on that panel at least, the upper right panel with storm relative velocity, half-degree. So again, 13 minutes before tornado onset with the storm moving primarily to the north. Now the cell is around 45 nautical miles from the RDA with a half-degree beam center height, a little under 4,000. So what that tells us right away is we're above a kilometer, so we're not going to see that all-important left flank velocity enhancement airstream. But this is kind of the utility with these arc disruptions. We can still indirectly infer the nature of the buoyancy of the parcels feeding it by watching for arc disruptions. And so immediately we see what appears to be an arc on the forward flank reflectivity gradient region. Not the clearest, but it's definitely there. We also see not necessarily extremely high, but a region of enhanced KDP to the north. And nonetheless, kind of an interesting separation vector angle over 180 degrees, but it isn't really mentioned a lot in our training, but days with elongated photographs, you can still get very high SRH even with an elongated photograph. And so since that was occurring, this angle of like 180 degrees or more isn't necessarily a bad thing. It still implies a large amount of storm scale SRH ingesting into the meso. So as we jump over to half-degree velocity, it reveals kind of a broad and diffuse area of circulation connected to the local meso. Nothing really to write home about. Given a favorable environment, good separation vector angle, though, is likely the meso will intensify. So key takeaway here would be that local meso intensification is likely forthcoming, and there's no signs of an arc disruption that would impact the airstream below that. So this would be TOR warning appropriate, if not already TOR warning. So now at T-7, so we'll jump ahead here 6 minutes. We continue to find both the arc and the foot prevalent with really little sign of any disruption, creating a buoyancy problem. Separation vector angle also remains high with continued low-level meso intensification likely. And sure enough, when we look at the half-degree storm relative velocity, we continue to see kind of this upward trend in low-level meso strength, but as predicted by the separation vector angle. So see, this alone tells you there's some predictive capability in that instead of reacting to rotational values. Anyway, moving ahead another minute, we see the ZDR becoming narrower along the forward flank reflectivity gradient, but otherwise still no sign of a disruption, and we do have a high separation vector angle. And further, the circulation continues to organize and strengthen. So at this point, I thought I had a pretty good vibe on this storm and expected a tornado within a few minutes, which did happen, so wasn't necessarily wrong on that. However, from here forward, I'll illustrate what I missed and how I in the last few minutes before genesis, I actually veered off the path in the wrong direction. So first we're going to go back to looking at CC, the upper right, just because I want to illustrate some stuff with hail. At the same time step, T-6. So as I said earlier, everything looks good, no disruption occurring despite this narrowing of the arc. Now, what I did not recognize in real time, and I think in large part the reason the arc was narrowing, we see this blue outline in the KDP that I've copied into the other three panels that primarily exists between the arc and the KDP foot. Now, this region seems to be dominated by extremely low to negative KDP, with even a few missing bends of KDP, but in relatively high reflectivity. So what might that be, which has near zero ZDR, reduced, although not extremely low CC, negative KDP, a few missing, but mostly negative, and high reflectivity values. So stay tuned, the answer is coming soon. So 2 minutes later, here at T-4, the arc has now been largely eliminated. It's really only a slight hint existing closer to a little bit to the west, I guess, of the town of Max, but overall not a huge sign. So I immediately thought, honestly, that it was game over with this disruption, and the signs pointing towards maybe the existence of hail here with the near zero ZDR and reduced CC saying we're getting this introduction of significantly negative buoyant air that going into the left flank velocity enhancement airstream. And now, while I couldn't calculate the separation vector angle, I didn't think it really mattered since it would be undercut anyway, the meso. And of course, this whole thing was a bit of a mistake as the blue outline of negative KDP was a clue here. Local meso remains decent, but again, I didn't think it mattered with the circulation being undercut. I didn't interpret this correctly. A couple minutes later here, we're just basically almost at tornado time. Same signals persist, no arc, but again, this persistent region of negative KDP, a little bit of missing now, with an area of 50 plus dB Z reflectivity. Low-level meso strength really hasn't changed much in the last 5 minutes. It is important to note here, as a separation vector algorithm, in many cases, since there's not much to work with, might even stop providing any information, or the information it does provide might be a bit biased in this event, non-tornadic, not necessarily, but making either the angle smaller than it really would be or just not providing any information. So that has the potential to mislead if you don't understand the limitations. So we're at tornado time. Same signals exist. Again, could be interpreted to mean a decreased risk of tornado. And of course, the low-level meso ironically shows a slight weakening. So, okay, obviously something critical happened here and I blew it. I didn't know what was going on. I do now, but at the time I had no idea and I missed it. So let's kind of dig back into a little bit more review. This time I'm going to torture you with some dual pole training from WDTD by just kind of outlining the values we were getting of CC, ZDR, and KDP on the associated reference charts. And so first with CC, it tends to illustrate exactly what we would figure as values are under 0.95, but not necessarily extremely low, and it suggests introduction of hail. ZDR also would strongly suggest existence of hail, but we can make the jump from here, like I did in real time, that this means we have a ring hail mix and it's game over. But when we start to look at KDP, there's a strong sign here that we have little to no liquid water existing within this hail. So why is that important? So first check, do the values in that forward flank reflectivity gradient region within that T-6 window, especially T-4, fit the severe hail mixed with rain situation. Now, reflectivity, yeah, it does. Not likely with ZDR. We had pretty low ZDR values. Possibly with CC, but definitely not KDP. There's just nothing there. So we can immediately eliminate that option, which subsequently raises questions about, is there really a disruptive, negative buoyancy getting fed into the left flank velocity enhancement airstream? I'd say, wait a second, how could there be negative ZDR values at times with hail? This just was a reminder that, hail, even though it's supposed to tumble, sometimes you can get positive and horizontal and vertical orientations. And when it does that, you start dealing with scattering that can actually flip the sign. So just as a note, sometimes you can get positive ZDR values. It doesn't necessarily mean there's ring. You may actually be dealing with a vertically oriented kind of elongated hailstone. So just something to remember when it comes to ZDR values and hail. So we're going to kind of flip the other direction now, and albeit sub-severe, but dry hail. And so the reflectivity is a little low, a little lower than what we saw in the storm, but in the ballpark. ZDR is definitely in the range, and now CC is not that high, but the KDP looks pretty solid. So essentially we seem to be getting hints now that we're looking at dry hail, but not necessarily all small hail. Another way to look at this is to determine kind of the extent of melting hail that can get a water torus around the hailstone, which is going to result in higher both positive KDP and ZDR values. Obviously, in this instance, we can't even get past step one. Hence, we're getting more and more evidence that we seem to be dealing with primarily dry hail that is lower in concentration, but possibly mixed in size. So when we put this together, the middle column kind of looks unrealistic on this slide. So in contrast, this first and third column kind of fit this scenario to varying degrees, as we see evidence of both, but not necessarily little evidence of, we really don't have any evidence of wet hail and or hail mixed with rain. So just to kind of go back here a little bit, this becomes kind of a critical clue as the research such as this study from 2008 kind of shows that most of downdraft cooling process comes from two things, evaporation of rain and melting of hail and graupel. Nonetheless, we don't really see any evidence that this hail is mixed with much, if any, rain, and we don't really have evidence of significantly melted hail either, with hail getting a large water torus. Both these seem to be largely absent. So I take us back to the arc disruption conceptual model and see, is this still valid, or did I completely gloss over something? Well, I completely glossed over something, because even within the conceptual model, we note that KDP should likely be high or at least above 0.5. Even omission of KDP due to lower CC shouldn't automatically mean the hail is wet either, as a lot of times you'd be able to use surrounding bends of 0 or negative KDP that can provide a sign that there's not a lot of liquid water in that region. So it's unlikely we have something like this image, which is depicting tons of rain mixed with hail and water splashing up. We don't seem to be getting that, which means we're also, you may get falsely, if you're not understanding the degree of wet versus dry hail, you may falsely believe you have a negative buoyancy problem, which is what I thought, as illustrated here by the 2014 Markowski and Richardson paper. So instead, this is kind of a cheesy video I found off of YouTube, but we have something ongoing like this. And while the video quality isn't the best, note the complete absence of rain or signs of melting hail. Kind of hard to tell here, but I really couldn't see any sign of even water splashing with the hail impacts. And so essentially, despite the arc disruption, the lack of really any significant infusion of liquid water as part of either the rain or the hail melting means that there wasn't a ton of negative buoyancy injecting into that left flank velocity enhancement airstream. And so the Markowski and Richardson conceptual model that saw earlier in John's talk as well, that's favorable for genesis, is much more likely to be ongoing than that previous version. So ultimately, I'm probably running long on time. Although Jeremy said I could take as long as I wanted, I won't take all day. This did leave me pondering, though, how common, this really is. Maybe the Benkelman vent's kind of a one-off thing. I wasn't sure. You don't know until you start to find other cases. So I'm going to start off. This is a case, it's actually a challenging case in the Dodge City area back in 2020. But this Tornadic supercell, it's quite a ways away from the RDA, so we're pushing the ability of being able to see much, but it's still within that range. You should be able to see an arc or a disruption. And so I'm just going to start right at this T-3, kind of in the same window where things fell apart on the Benkelman case. And so when you look at this, you see hints of a region of raised ZDR, probably not necessarily an arc, but maybe as some papers have noted, a ZDR shield. But the key thing is it's abruptly disrupted by an area of negative to near zero KDP values. And then there's also reduced ZDR, very little between slightly negative to positive, although me scattering, can't necessarily say that's rang. And I don't have it shown here, but there was reduced CC values. And so sort of the Benkelman case, we likely have dry hail creating a disruption instead of wet hail mixed with rain. It's still favorable for genesis. Here's another case. Start off at T-7, a little closer to the RDA. So unlike the previous case, like Benkelman, we start off with actually a non-disrupted ZDR arc and essentially minimal sign of hail. However, it changes quickly, get in that window, T-4, with an obvious disrupted arc now caused by a region of around zero ZDR, but more importantly, a large area of negative or missing KDP. Unlike the previous cases I showed you, the area of missing KDP due to very low CC is kind of exceeding the amount of negative KDP, which does raise some questions as to what we're looking at here and the extent of liquid water. Nonetheless, I think this is where you can use the adjacent bins to the best extent possible. And you immediately notice in this region, most of the area contains either a negative KDP or a best KDP value slightly positive, but still largely under 0.5. Hence, we likely have a situation where existence of dry hail adds very little negative buoyancy. Now, contrast this with, a non-tornadic cases. One of them is you've seen in the TWIP modules several times, but showing it in terms of, this dry versus wet hail. In this case, you get more of a rain mix with maybe wet melting hail scenario or just rain within the disruption. And so there's kind of two areas in that blue. You kind of have the southern half that you see a few missing bins of KDP, but most of the KDP is generally greater than 0.5. Fairly low, but still higher than 0.5. I don't see any gray shaded areas there for negative. In the northern half of the disruption is seeing KDP values exceeding 4 to 5. Gone, again, along with the ZDR values at best maybe around 1, 1.5. And so solid indication of rain mixing with hail, injecting what is likely a substantial amount of negative buoyancy into that left flank velocity enhancement airstream. So it's important to reiterate a few things here, and again, I don't know how I'm doing on time, but regardless of wet versus dry hail, a disrupted arc is not necessarily inferring that low-level size sorting and this associated enhanced storm scale SRH is absent, as the local mesointensification might or is typically still ongoing. And so this is kind of where the algorithms, such as those displayed earlier, may struggle. So this is where we can, quote, beat the machines. And I can't reiterate this enough, as despite progress in these algorithms, humans can still improve, on the decision making if, and that's the important part, if they take the time to properly assess the storm, besides just looking for rotational values. Now the disruption is, it's not that the disruption is not providing some degree of or details on the degree of negative buoyancy, because that is occurring, especially how it's feeding the left flank velocity enhancement airstream that composes the tornado seed. So, but the existence of any hail does not always equate to strong negative buoyancy. And that was my failure in that, especially that last 4 minutes of the Benkelman event. And so this is where, as a warning decision, Matt, you have to really differentiate dry versus, or really even sparsely populated hail from environments where hail is mixed with rain and or wet, fast melting hail exists. So unfortunately, ZDR and to a lesser degree CC may look very similar for wet versus dry hail, which I can attest to, obviously may lead to misinterpretation of what what is ongoing and tornadogenesis potential really is. And so this is where I think the addition of KDP when assessing a ZDR disruption can become an important clue, because, again, as I said a few moments ago, differentiating wet versus dry hail is critical for correctly interpreting the probability of genesis. So that is all I have. Again, I don't know how long I've run, but I guess if there's time for questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, that's all I have.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, you're at 11 minutes over, but that's okay. This is an important talk and good to go with here. I probably don't have time for a lot of questions, so maybe if you have something, put it in the comments or the question box, and we can get to it when we have some extra time. I can confirm one thing. I was the one who did the damage survey for that, and the house or the area that got a lot of damage, they had mentioned prior to the storm getting there, I can't believe they used lime size, but they said they had lime sized hail and nothing. It was just, there was no rain. There was just these big chunks of hail falling out of the sky, and then obviously tornado came. So
there you go. Confirmation.
Yeah, a little independent confirmation there.
Appreciate that. I warned you I would run along, Jeremy. So
I know I was worried when you told me that. I'm like, oh gosh, that was one of my first standalone surveys in a while, and it's hard to survey out there. There's not a whole lot to hit. So.
Yep, indeed. Anyway, thank you.
Yep. All right, next up is Caleb Brown. He's going to talk about a case review of potentially tornadic QLCS that happened on May 24th, 2020 in the Nebraska Sandhills. So, Caleb, I'm going to hand it over to you, okay?